This is OverDrive with Hayes, Noodles, and the O-Dog on TSN 1050.
All right, here we go. OverDrive off and running. TSN 1050 on the TSN app. Your home smart speakers up on TSN 2 all afternoon. Bryan Hayes back in studio, and look who has made his triumphant return. Dave Poulin.
Everybody was waiting for Jeff O'Neill.
Well, possibly.
Jamie McLennan.
Yeah, possibly Owen Noodles. They'll be back next week, and I'll give them the same introduction. Although they're not worthy of the same introduction. You are worthy of that level of introduction, Poulin.
I totally appreciate it. It's
good seeing you, buddy. Good seeing
you as well.
Yeah, I missed last week, and it was a big one. It was a big one.
Apparently something went on last week.
Yeah, so there is a long history on this show because I take time off.
You're allowed.
I'm allowed to. I'm entitled to, and I will continue to. But whenever I take time off, it feels like news breaks, and significant news breaks. And I will say this summer, the content has been slower than past summers. Allows you to be more creative.
I would agree.
Allows us to have different conversations on different topics. But I don't know, there's something about, I think the city of Toronto, it's just been quiet. It wasn't necessarily quiet into late June and early July through to mid-July, but I would say for about 4 or 5 weeks, the Jays have been kind of just hanging around, and there's no Olympics, there's no World Cup. It's just a different summer. Feels like a bit of an off summer, so to speak.
Well, we're coming.
And then last week things happened.
Well, they happened, but this is the first in the hockey world. This is the first normal summer we've had time-wise since 2019.
That's right. COVID threw everything out of whack.
So we didn't even know what summer was.
Right.
I mean, it was here, it was there, it was compressed. We were playing. We were giving out Stanley Cups. We didn't know exactly what it was. So this was the first one that was normal. I do think the quiet on the Leafs' part was by design, by Brad Treliving. I think it was, let's calm the waters. Everybody's focused on July 1st and all the rights the players got and no moves and no trades. And it was quiet. Mm-hmm. But I think that was by design, and I think it was very effective. But the Matthews signing, I mean, that caught everybody by surprise.
Yeah, I think what my intuition suggests that he and his camp and probably the Leafs were realizing that as the summer went on, that anxiety was starting to pick up in the marketplace. That what's possibly taking so long? Because all of the reports were out throughout June and into the beginning of July from all the insiders who had clearly been connected to the team and Matthews and his camp. Don't worry, it's all good. And that worked for a long time.
It did.
For the better part of a month and a half, I think everyone just went their separate ways and said, we're good, this will be figured out. Then all of a sudden you realize these guys have to be back in town in a week or two, and the mics are going to be waiting. Like, he wasn't getting to day one of camp before someone stopped him on the streets in Toronto and said, what's going on here?
And I had already built a strategy for him, for his people, that said, I will talk about it day one and not again until I sign.
And now that's over. That's another part of this.
Totally over.
Being over with Matthews signing. Now you just show up and it's all good and you go to work. Now, Nylander will be a different story, but Willie's got another year on his contract. There will be other compelling storylines, seeing Max Domi as a Maple Leaf for the first time. You know, Ryan Reeves is going to make some sort of an impact in terms of personality and engagement on day one.
I think you're going light there with some sort of...
I think there'll be a lot of it. I think Tyler Bertuzzi brings a lot to the table in terms of his personality. So it just allows for the first day of camp to feel a little bit different. But I think there probably was an understanding from both parties. Don't allow this to go too long where it gets carried away, where people are wondering what's actually happening.
Well, I think in a good negotiation, they both got to a point that they thought was fair for their side. That, yes, both sides made some concessions, and I don't think that enough people understand the risk factor on Auston Matthews' part.
That hasn't come up a lot.
It hasn't, and it's huge, Bryan. And, you know, that day when he agreed to a 4-year deal and he could go 8, I was with all, my buddies, and they were like, okay, what would you have done if you were the player? I said, you're talking to the wrong guy. I would have signed a 9-year deal.
Right. Give me a lifetime
and
deal.
you could only take 8. In my day, you could extend a contract. You didn't have to wait till July 1st to sign, within the last year. So my first contract was a 3-year deal. I played 1 year of it. I had a great rookie year. I had 76 points in my rookie year, 30 goals. They came back to me and said, we will rip up the last 2 years and sign you to an additional year. And it was 3 years plus an option. So you're getting a raise for the last 2 years and another year. Of course, I did it. I played 1 year of that contract. They came back and said, we'd like to sign you to a 5-year deal.
Oh, really?
So we will drop the last 2 years of this and add another 3 on. I was always in the middle of a long-term deal. I mean, I was an undrafted free agent. This was ridiculous security. I mean, who was giving an undrafted free agent a 5-year deal?
Right.
So had I been Auston Matthews, very different situation, obviously. But if you think about it, Bryan, he's done it differently all the way along. He went to Switzerland to play his last year of eligibility before coming to the NHL. No one else did that. I mean, he's chosen his own route all the way along. But this one, on a night when the mega sports star, Ohtani, goes down with a significant injury that night, and I'm sitting with all my buddies and they're going, like, are you kidding me? Like, does anyone bring that up?
Well,
there's a risk here.
There is a risk, and it's funny you say that was your initial thought, because I was sitting there with my wife, and she said the same thing. She's like, didn't he leave a lot of money on the table?
A lot.
Which he may not, though, Poulin. If he's healthy and plays great, he didn't leave money. He's going to take more. But he blows his knee out, or all of a sudden, that risk keeps flaring up. He becomes a 30-goal scorer instead of a 50-goal scorer. He's leaving money on the table. And security, right? There's something about going to sleep understanding I have 9 years locked in where I know what I'm going to make, and it's a fortune, right? Because there were certain things he was always going to get. He was always going to get the ridiculous signing bonus, which all these big guys in Toronto get because Toronto's willing to do that, can do it, and is clearly a benefit. A lot of teams in the league will not do that. They will do that, not even think twice about it. He was always getting a no trade, no move. All that was happening anyway. But you're right, in terms of the back end of it, if something falls off a cliff for him, or even it just drags back to a certain level, not anything significant where he's like, he can't play anymore. He's just not a top 5 player in the world anymore, right? In 5 years, all of a sudden, he's the 30th best player in the world. Then he's probably not going to even get a raise unless the cap goes up exponentially and it's crazy and some team is desperate and says, we'll give you 7 years at ridiculous money because we want the great Auston Matthews to come here. So there was a risk on his end, for sure. But when it comes down to it, there's so many different angles to this. And I think there's a couple of precursors that have to come up. One, the story of Matthews as a Leaf has been a great story. It's an incomplete story because of the playoffs, and everyone understands that. And that's what he needs to do. It's right in front of him. The label greatest Maple Leaf of all time now is within his grasp. But he has to have playoff success. And I've always believed this. You can call him the greatest goal scorer in team history. That's already been established. I think you can argue he had the greatest individual season of all time when he scored 60 and won the Hart. I might argue Gilmore 92-93. For me, it's real close. But he hit 60. He won the Hart. You can argue maybe he's the greatest 7-year run in team history. There's a lot of different things, but the regular season successes, and it stops me from saying you're the greatest Leaf ever because you need the next chapter.
He does.
It's the most important one. So he's got 5 more years to chase that. He's chasing greatest American to ever play. He's chasing maybe not greatest goal scorer ever, but can he get into a conversation where he's one of the top 5 or 7? Yes, I think that's attainable.
He's capable.
So there's a lot in front of him here that he's going to continue to chase. And I'm ecstatic that that's going to be in a Maple Leaf jersey because this city and this team and this fan base has lacked that for quite some time. The top 5 guy who's consistently a Leaf. And now you play 12 years here. Let's say he moves on, whatever. If he goes into the Hall of Fame someday, he's going in as a Maple Leaf. He will always be known as the Auston Matthews of the Maple Leafs if you play 12 plus years of your career, especially in an original six market. So putting the contract aside, the cap hit, the years, all that, I wanted the Auston Matthews as a Maple Leaf story to continue.
Right.
So I'm happy that that is continuing. Unfinished business, we're all aware of that. The second precursor is the hard salary cap sucks. It's awful. And what it did was took the pressure away from owners and effectively put it on the players to establish the salary cap, the culture around getting paid, all that kind of stuff. Because the owners can put their hands up and say, what do you want? If we're up to us, we'd give you $25 million a year, but we can't because there's a hard salary cap. And this is another example of it, because what it comes down to now, as much as I love Matthews being here, and he was always going to get paid, the negotiation started at $12.7 million per year. He was getting there plus.
No question.
No question, because the bar was Nathan McKinnon, $12.6 million. Matthews is up. He's 25. He's a top 5 player in the world. He was going above it. That's the way it goes. When McDavid comes up, he'll go above that. Draisaitl above. That's the way the salary cap works. It started at 12.7. He only went to 13.25. I think that cap hit is very reasonable. But the fact that it's 4 years instead of 8 suggests to me, if he's healthy, the math equation, which is as big of a part of building a Stanley Cup winner as the actual team, the bounces you get, who you play against, because of the nature of the hard salary cap, it's a math equation in many ways. They're never going to get a discount on him at any point in his prime.
And that was insured when the last contract was signed for the term it was signed for.
That's right. And that's what became even more clear here, is not so much this negotiation where he was going to be a UFA and he held all the cards. What becomes clear here is how much they screwed up the last time. They screwed up with Matthews the last time, Marner the last time.
He's still the
Nylander the last
fourth
time.
highest paid player in the league. At
Exactly.
the end of a contract.
And he's back up.
At the end of the contract, you should not still be.
Right.
Now, a lot of extenuating circumstances, the pandemic, the cap being frozen, all those things were not going to be part of the plan originally. So I get it. But as much as it was in his favor and it's in his favor, I can spin it that it's now in the Leafs' favor. Because at the end of this coming season, there'll be 12 unrestricted free agents. Over the next couple of years, they have 5 years to totally change this hockey team if they choose to do it, around a true superstar in Auston Matthews. Only long-term signee over that time is Morgan Riley, and the number is not exorbitant. So you're the Leafs, and you now have one of the premier players in the game, and think of the Vegas Knights, think of Seattle, starting with a clean slate, no hangover at all. You've got 5 years. And within that 5 years, everybody else will be expired essentially within the next couple of years. There's a couple players, Camp, small number players.
Right. Nyes, you're going to hold on to.
Yarn,
guys
Croc.
like that.
But if you wanted to take it right down to 2 guys, essentially you could do it.
Yep. Well, and now they've got cost certainty, time certainty. They know what it is. Again, the 13.25 is around. That's fine.
I think that's totally fair.
I think it's totally fair. I think he was always getting $12.7 million plus. He went $525,000 over McKinnon. That is not egregious considering it kicks in next year.
And one
That's
little
fine,
side note,
but
too, huge pressure from the Players Association here.
Yes, that always comes up. That's why McKinnon went up by $100,000 on McDavid, because I think he realized I have to go up. I have to. So that's one thing. Again, the term, you're never getting a discount on this guy.
I'm fine with it, Brian.
I hear you, Poulin, but you look at it's a math equation. And what I worry about the 4 years also is that there wasn't an understanding from the player here about the culture that sets for the other guys. Now, because I expect Mitch Marner calls up and goes, okay, I'll take 4 at 12.5 then. Okay, you're not getting a discount on Mitch either. So you're going to have Matthews and Mitch never getting a discount.
You've got to make some decisions.
And Willie's probably sitting there saying, all right, I'll take 4 years at 10.
Willie
at some point, the team's got to step up and say, absolutely not.
Willie already took 4 less for the last 4 years in his mind.
Based on the money.
He did.
Yes,
on the money.
But none of them signed a long-term. Like, if they all signed for 8, you'd have Matthews and Marner for the next 4 years and Willie for the next 3. That's a discount.
Yes.
That's the math equation that you need to be able to succeed, and they're not going to get it because of what happened last time. And that, to me, is very disappointing. But it's a reality, and it's a fact.
Inherited situation.
It's an inherited situation.
For Brad Treliving, and I think this first step is a good one. They've got some hard decisions to make. They do.
Yeah.
But they're doing it around one of the elite players.
They were never walking on him. He wasn't gonna walk on them either, right? There is the other component to this about Canadians or Canadian markets, American superstars. I've always heard he loves playing here. So this is another example of that. Yes, it's not 8 years, but he's here. He's going to be here for 12 years. He loves being a Maple Leaf.
Over the last year, here was my fear. The LA Kings. Kopitar was coming off the books at the end of next year at 10.5, whatever. They were a good young team. They were LA. You can live in Manhattan Beach. Mm-hmm. You can be a superstar or not be a superstar. And I thought that would have been a very enticing market for Auston Matthews. What changed there was LA went the other way. They got Pierre-Luc Dubois. But did they do that knowing they didn't have a shot at it?
That's what I would suggest happen. I obviously don't know that definitively, but I would assume.
We do now because we do now.
We do now that all the reports were accurate. They're working this out. He wants to be a Leaf. He's going to stay here.
Because you're doing your homework if you're in LA and you're saying, is this a possibility?
And then they realize it's not.
They wanted two rock star centers to go against the Edmonton centers. Mm-hmm. Kopitar took a discount to stay, not as much of a discount as he would have had to had Matthews gone there. But I think those types of situations, and a good representation is presenting that situation to his player. He's saying, look, what about going to the West Coast? Okay, let's eliminate every single thing. And the bottom line is he wanted to become a Maple Leaf and stay a Maple Leaf.
Well, and again, I wish it weren't about the cap. I wish it weren't about the math equation because all in all, I'm happy for Leaf fans that the Matthews story continues because he's a great player. And it's long overdue for the Leafs to have someone that they drafted, they cultivated, stay with the team for a long time, and be the face of the organization for a long time.
How much are you going to change around him?
We'll see. And how much is he willing to change? Because he has to change the way he plays in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the next thing now.
Better.
This is all out of the way. You know who you're going to be in the regular season. And obviously, you got to play in the regular season. But it is incumbent on him and whoever else is going to lead this team to change their history when it comes to the playoffs. History is changing for the Canadian national team on the soccer side. And for Toronto FC, we have some big breaking news today that I am here for, Poulin, and I'm glad you are as well. John Herdman is out for the national team. Where's he going? Down the street. Toronto FC has hired John Herdman. What does this mean for the national team? We're a few years away from hosting a World Cup at BMO Field. What does it mean for Toronto FC? Josh Kloke will join us of The Athletic. We'll get into it. And the Jays losing again yesterday. They dropped 2 or 3 yesterday. Was absolutely excruciating. And they got a brutal team in town tonight. Can they take advantage of it? We'll get into it later this afternoon. Dave Poulin's in here. I'm Bryan Hayes. OverDrive continues. TSN 1050 and on TSN 2.
Now, back to OverDrive with Hayes, Noodles, and the O-Dog.
OverDrive continues, brought to you by FanDuel, bringing you everything from the opening line to the final score. Get to our best bets, brought to you by FanDuel later this afternoon. Jays back in action tonight. That was a sickening display in the ninth yesterday. And you dropped 2 or 3 against Cleveland. Cleveland puts a 10 spot on you. They got one of the worst offenses in baseball, which has been a surprise because, again, the arms have been so great. And then they have an off day, and the bats can't get it done in the end, and especially in the ninth. Biggio's bunt, Espinal hits into a double play. Awful. So we'll get to that a little bit later this afternoon. Brad Lidge just after 5 o'clock. We've got Keegan Matheson from the park in the 6 p.m. hour. But we talked a little Leafs, we've talked a little Jays, and now Toronto FC has decided it's time for them to straighten things out. Because as bad as it was for the Jays in the ninth inning last night, that ninth inning has been the whole season for Toronto FC. Their season has been the ninth inning at the Dome last night. And to chat about it, we're joined now by staff writer for The Athletic, who have done a great, great job on this Herdman national team, Toronto FC reporting. Here's Josh Kloke. Josh, what do you make of this? John Herdman is the new man down at Toronto FC, takes over, which means he's leaving the national team. From your standpoint, when you're sitting down to write on this, Do you lead with the Toronto FC part of it or the national team part of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. You probably lead with the national team stuff, if only because, they have the brighter future. There's a World Cup coming to Canada in less than 3 years. And I think it'll probably be the only World Cup in Canada in our lifetimes. And so to walk away from that is a seismic move. And I think that speaks to a little bit of, the dysfunction that's going on behind the scenes with Canada Soccer right now, although it's not really so much behind the scenes anymore. Mm-hmm. And B, just in, I guess, the state of the men's team and whether John Herdman believed he could actually take this team moving forward. Because you mentioned it, Toronto FC season is done. I don't want to hear about 2012 when they started as bad as they did. This is the worst season in franchise history. And John Herdman isn't even going to take over until October 1st, right? What John Herdman does with Toronto FC essentially starts in 2024 in full. But you're walking away from a team that looks like they're going to play in the Copa America, which for those unfamiliar is like the Euros for South America. So you have the chance to play competitive games against Brazil and Argentina, as a means to prepare for the World Cup in 2026. And you're walking away from that. So this again is a seismic move for Canada Soccer, and I think whoever gets the next post, right, whoever gets hired by Canada Soccer is a person that they absolutely have to get right here.
Well, I agree with you. My initial take on this and angling was the national team, which I think will bother Toronto FC because I think Toronto FC is trying to make a splash here, right? They understand the impact of Herdman, what he represents, what he symbolizes. And I don't think the reporting and the analysis gets to Toronto FC until you're 2, 3, 4 layers deep on the national team because Herdman, he's been so outspoken about the dysfunction and so outspoken about the lack of funding. I mean, clearly he jumped here in many ways, I'm sure, because Toronto FC is going to pay him. But you mentioned whoever's going to come in and take over for him. You would think, Josh, this would be a great gig. You're talking about an up-and-coming program, a team that just made the World Cup for the first time in over 30 years, and a team that's going to co-host the World Cup on top of the Copa America stuff. And yet I'm not sure Canadian soccer can hire anybody right now because who are they going to pay? Who are they going to possibly get at this point if they don't have any money?
Right. There's a few ways to go with this. And you're right. I've been talking to people all over Canada Soccer for the last few weeks and some people throughout global football as well. And everybody has said the same thing. This is going to be a highly desired job for a few reasons, right? You get the opportunity to coach at home in a World Cup, which again, very rarely happens. 2, you get to coach incredible young players who come 2026 are going to be in their prime, right? Alphonso Davies is already the best left back in the world. Jonathan David by 2026 is going to be playing at a top 10 club in the world. Tajon Buchanan, may very well be there as well. And without pumping our own tires, Canada is a fantastic place to live, right? You look at, countries around the world where international managers go. Sometimes they go for a lot of cash, but oftentimes they're going to places that, might not be at the top of, the most livable countries in the world lists, right? So it is a fantastic place to live. There's a few ways you can do this, though. If you're Canada Soccer and you're serious about hiring a name, I'm talking a name brand that people beyond the soccer community will recognize, what you can do is add on new sponsors that will provide, sponsorship just for that coach in particular, right? You can raise funds that way. That's something that's been floated to me by a number of people within Canada Soccer as an option. So you could go that route. You could, hire someone that's been an assistant at the World Cup. That's another option. But the third option that I think is worth considering here is if Canada Soccer is really serious about, growing talent, developing talent, perhaps they should be looking in their own backyard, right? And perhaps they could find a coach in Canada that could come in, and this is no disrespect to whoever that Canadian coach might be, but under budget, right? And under the kind of cost that you had with Herdman. One name that I've been tracking really closely is Bobby Smirniotis, who's the head coach at Forge FC, Canadian Premier League club. He's won 3 of the last Canadian Premier League titles. He's a fantastic tactician, and I think that's something that kind of tactical blueprint, I think that was kind of lost under Herdman. And I think he's someone that has developed players like Kyle Larin, Tejon Buchanan, Richie Larea. So I think he makes a lot of sense to be in consideration. But, as I mentioned, there's going to be no shortage of top coaches that are going to want this gig.
John Herdman taking over as the head coach for Toronto FC, leaving the Canadian national team. We're chatting with Josh Kloke, staff writer for The Athletic. And I'm curious, Josh, in terms of all of the reported infighting with the players, both on the men's and the women's side, about the lack of funding. If you think the players, we're talking Davies, David, like the big boys here that know they're going to be a big part of the program in 2026, how do you think they'd react if Canadian soccer, though, found money for a big manager here that would help them in terms of, trying to achieve success at the World Cup? Do you think they would be a proponent for that, or might that cause even more bad blood where the players will say, wait a minute, you found it for the coach, but you don't have it for us? Like, how do you think the players are going to be tracking this hiring?
I think that's a really good question and a really good way to look at it. I guess my only retort would be, if this coach can help them win games and literally win World Cup games, which is something they didn't do, I think that's more important than anything, right? That the men's national team, a lot of these players, yes, they want to get paid and they want to find a deal that is fair for them and compensates them for the work that they put in. But I think their kind of public image has really taken a hit over the last few months. I mean, you don't need to go very far on Twitter to see the last statement that they released and how a lot of Canadian soccer fans are kind of saying, you know what, you lost in the Nations League finals. You went bagel-free in the World Cup. Like a little bit of like, what have you done for me lately? So I think the men's national team and some of the best players in there recognize that they need to get back to where they were in 2021, which is just winning games consistently. Because if you win games, you build up that kind of goodwill with the public, and you can show that you can be a big draw at home for any friendly games that you can, have at home, and the gate revenue goes to Canada Soccer. So then you can say, well, we brought in money for you, we need to get paid now. So I just think winning is more important than anything for this men's national team. And if they can find a coach, an experienced coach that is, yes, going to demand a serious paycheck, I think some of the best players on that men's national team that regularly get challenged by great managers abroad, we should add, I think they'd be fine with it.
Oh, that's an interesting one about the great managers abroad, Josh, because if you look at the success of John Herdman, it's been in the turnaround more than in the finishing.
Yeah.
And coaches across all sports, there are guys that are really good at the initial stages of the turnaround. They get, everybody fired up. They can take it to a certain point, but he hasn't taken it to the final point, and the ultimate final point is in 3 years here. And so he's walking away from really what, would be his final chapter in I Can Close, and maybe going to another turnaround with TFC.
I mean, you guys know this. Herdman is a savvy person. He's a smart guy. He would have looked at this team and he would have said, do I have the full support of every single player, every single key player in this room? And if I don't, I have to know that it might only get worse towards 2026. And he's a young manager, right? The men's national team was never going to be his final stop, right? So he would have known if things get worse and worse come Copa America, his reputation takes a hit as well, right? What John Herdman has done, and I think we need to say John Herdman deserves a tremendous amount of credit for overhauling the program and getting, a team that, beforehand thought qualifying for the World Cup was laughable. Get them to mentally buy in the qualification. That's as important an accomplishment as anyone has, I guess, accomplished in Canadian soccer. But what John Herdman did, and I think what part of his legacy with the men's national team will be, he raised the floor, but he didn't raise the ceiling. And I think, as you alluded to, Poulin, that's the next step, is finding a manager who can challenge, the likes of Alphonso Davies, who right now is playing under Thomas Tuchel, one of the most accomplished managers in Europe, finding someone that can really make him tick when he returns to the national team. Right? That's going to be incredibly important. And it's not just him, right? Alistair Johnson, he moved to Celtic. He's being coached by Brendan Rodgers now, an incredibly experienced coach. And John Herdman couldn't always offer that kind of tactical know-how that I think these players in Europe are getting. So I think that's what Canada Soccer needs, is someone that, again, can kind of raise the ceiling for these players, because this is a generational group of players. And I don't know if it's going to get any better anytime soon. And you need to make the most of it come 2026.
We're chatting with Josh Kloke of The Athletic. Again, news today, John Herdman is the new head coach of Toronto FC, not taking over until October. But with that, leaving a vacancy with the Canadian national team. Now, we've talked about the national team and the angling on that side. From Toronto FC standpoint, based on the rep that you detailed here, Josh, Poulin just expanded on, Herdman is a motivator. He's a passionate leader. He's a guy that pushes players in directions maybe they didn't know they could get to. But tactically, I think he was exposed a bit at the World Cup, and I'm curious what he can bring when it comes to league play. I mean, this is something different from him. He's always been with the national team, whether it's the women's side or now the men's side. And when Lewicki got here, it was Lewicki, Bezbatchenko, and Greg Vanney, and they set a standard of basically MLS Cup or bust, and they achieved that. They got to multiple finals, and they actually won one. Like, with this hiring of Herdman, is that the standard, or is this just about trying to get Toronto FC completely out of the muck? Like, just because they've embarrassed themselves this year. So is it about them just trying to get back to respectability, or do you think this hiring is they believe Herdman can get them back to MLS Cup?
I think this is being viewed internally at both MLSE and TFC as a complete game changer. Like, this has to be seen, from my perspective, as a coup for Bill Manning, right? Because, and I've said this before, I don't think anybody in Toronto sports, maybe outside of Schneider right now, but I don't think anybody in Toronto sports needed a W more than Bill Manning right now, right? His team is languishing. His highly paid team is languishing. And now you're bringing in a coach, and you can sell it as you know, he pried away John Herdman from the men's national team. He pried John Herdman away from a World Cup at home. He's coming in with a little more autonomy than I think people kind of understand, right? John Herdman went to his prospective coaches, the coaches that he interviewed, and he said, we are expecting a full rebuild of this roster. So John Herdman is going to come in, and that's part of what made this job so attractive to John. Right? If you're a head coach, you do want to start at the bottom, because you know there's only no place to go but up. And that improves your reputation as well here. So I think this is about bringing some much needed positivity and enthusiasm to a club, to a stadium that hasn't had it since, 2019? Right? That's a really long time for a team that should still be considered one of the biggest clubs in MLS. So it's a great opportunity for John, because he's going to come in with the resources, get the resources that he didn't have at Canada Soccer. And he's going to be expected to do what he did before, which is overhaul a program, do so with a sense of motivation and positivity. He's not going to be asked to be anything he isn't. And I think that's why Bill Manning went so hard for John Herdman, because he knew that in Herdman, he has a new face of the team. He has someone that's going to, hopefully be willing to take some bullets when things go bad. But he's someone that's going to be able to motivate a group of players that, for the past few years have been nothing short of depressed, I think.
Right. Well, we'll see. It's a great hire, I think, in terms of making an impact immediately in the marketplace and raising hopes and aspirations. But again, the true work is, it's ahead for John Herdman. There's a lot of work to be done here, and it's going to take him a lot of time. He is Josh Kloke of The Athletic. Great stuff, Josh. Really appreciate you joining us today, buddy. We'll do it again soon.
Yeah, anytime, boys. Take care.
There he is, Josh Kloke of The Athletic. Yeah, this is going to be heavy lifting for Toronto FC and for Herdman, but there's no introduction needed here. Everyone knows Herdman. And for the most part, everyone loves what he represents, right? There's X's and O's that I'm sure he needs to improve upon. And I'm sure a lot of soccer analysts would look at it and say, things are going to have to change now that you're in a different world, right? Before it was national team, now you're in a league play. A
very different world, a day-to-day world in a whole different manner.
And guys getting paid big money, right? Like Davies is playing for country. Yes, it's been very public that the players feel like they need to be compensated more. That's understood. But Alphonso Davies and Jonathan David and Kyle Laird, they're playing because they're Canadians.
No question.
Toronto
They're making their money somewhere else.
They are, exactly.
They're making their money.
But like Herdman is about to work with guys who are there because they're paying them to be there, right? And that's a different form of motivation too, right?
For the first time in the last dozen years.
Right. Like he hasn't coached in a situation like this, league play taken over in a really bad spot. Like there's no reason to believe Toronto FC will be competitive next year.
But the men's team was like going from the women's to the men's was a significant jump in a similar manner.
Sure.
Like he was taking over a program that was pretty beat up.
And the women's were great.
They were on top of it.
Yeah. And now it's a different story. But listen, Herdman, and you know that his introductory presser will be an art form.
Oh,
yeah, exactly. Like it'll be poetic.
Done it before.
He's done it before. He's the king. He gives a great speech, and he's a very inspiring guy.
But you know there are guys across sport that are great turnaround guys. Like if you've got a team that's down, bring him in.
Yep.
It's good up to a certain point. But is it the guy I'm going to win with?
Right. Exactly. There are starters and there are closers, and they both make a lot of money. The starters are probably worth more because, like it's a real grind.
See, I think the startup is the easier one of the two.
Really,
I do.
Than getting over the top.
Yeah. You know, it's funny in Coach of the Year each year. I don't just look at the guy that won 20 more games than they did the year before. I look at the guy that's been able to maintain and somehow find a way to motivate a John Cooper type who that's a hard job. It's a really hard job.
You're right, Poulin, yet the voting generally goes against that.
It does. Because you're saying, well, you've got all the toys.
Yeah.
Well, having all the toys is sometimes a bigger challenge than
keeping all the toys motivated can be very difficult to do. John Schneider's got a lot of toys. Doesn't seem to be too much motivation
that
down there.
might fit right into what we're talking about.
Yeah. Let's come back and get into what we saw yesterday down at the Rogers Center and what we can expect tonight with Kevin Gosman on the Mount of Washington in town. And the Jays are chasing it now, right? They're lucky because Texas is absolutely falling apart.
Houston snuck in.
And Houston, I think Houston has the wherewithal to stick around and get there.
Yeah, they got the pedigree.
Exactly. They get the pedigree.
Flat out.
Tampa's hot again. Tampa's expanded their lead they're in.
Seattle continues.
They're red hot. What are they, 9-1 in their last 10?
9-1.
But yeah, it's a tough spot for the Jays. Like it feels like they're in a worse spot today than they have been at any point this year. And that's saying something, considering you still got 31 games to play. You're only 2.5 out. But Bichette not in the lineup tonight. Chapman on the IL. We'll come back, get into the Jays. Brad Lidge will join us in about 15 minutes. Overdrive continues. TSN 1050 and on TSN 2.
Now, back to Overdrive with Hayes, Noodles, and the O-Dog.
All right, so Bo Bichette not in the lineup tonight, and I guess he's going for an MRI. So I'm not sure why he didn't go for an MRI when Chapman went for an MRI. Like Steiner said it
was busy.
Yeah, I guess Chapman's got it booked. Sorry, Matt. We can slide Matt in, Bo, but maybe you can join us tomorrow. But it seems, playing amateur PhD here, that he's compensating for the knee. And that happens, right? You get an injury, you're running.
You're capable at the plate, even with it. Like he just is. He's going to get his hits. He's going to get his knocks.
Yeah. Ever since he came back, it hasn't been like at the same level as his, the height Bo Bichette. With Chapman, it's not even that you're missing his bat because his bat has been terrible since the opening portions of the season, but defensively you're missing him.
So good.
Leadership you're supposed to have in the clubhouse with Chapman, and now he goes on the 10-day IL. I don't know if Bichette's going to end up with an IL stint, but if he's out tonight, it would suggest it could be moving in that direction. And again, the Jays have really put themselves in a precarious position because, as someone tweets in, it's not so much about the being 2.5 out. It's that you only have so many more games left, and everyone understands kind of the number that you got to get to. Like you probably got to get to at least 90 wins, maybe 91, 92, and you start doing the math on that, they got to play well above 500.
Well, I've got a number for you right now, and it's 12. The next 12 games are against Washington, who are only ahead of the New York Mets.
They're terrible.
Okay. Colorado,
terrible.
Last place. Oakland,
terrible.
Last place. KC,
Awful.
Last place.
And they got 4 against Texas coming up, too, at home.
4 of the worst 5 teams coming up.
You're right. You got to go, 9-3 should be a minimum.
I wrote 10-2 down.
I agree with you. But
maybe
a
more,
minimum
maybe run
9-3.
the table.
And if you're right, Poulin, psychologically, you do that, you wake up after those 12 games, and you're probably in a playoff spot.
You would be, and you'd have Texas coming in who are reeling right now.
Right. Because
that's one of the teams you're chasing.
Tampa's in, and 2 of the other 3 teams chasing in the West are getting in.
So it's funny with those 2 because Seattle's at the top right now, but everyone's just saying, but they're on a really good run.
They're going to slow down.
But they're on a really good run. Why?
Yeah.
And then you fear Houston because of their pedigree.
It seems like Texas is the target. But in order for that 4-game series to matter, you got to take care of business here. And then eventually you're going to have to win games also against the AL East, which you've done a horrible job against. Right. Although it's been better the last month or so. But you still got games against Tampa. Now, like the Yankees. You're going to have games against the Yankees. You got to beat the Yankees. You have to now.
Who aren't the Yankees?
They're not even close. They're getting goofed on by everybody in baseball, which is, I think, something everyone wants, right? Like everyone's waiting for the Yankees to fall off.
You need
waiting for Belichick to fall
the
off.
Dallas Cowboys, everyone.
Yes.
You just do. You just wait.
But I think it's even more, it's more, I think, enjoyable with the Yankees because, like, the Cowboys haven't won anything in like 30 years.
The Yankees are always there.
Yeah. Even though they haven't won a World Series since 2009, I think it is. They were in the ALCS a year ago. They're always in the playoffs. They're always chasing 100 wins. They're always a team.
Got an Aaron Judge.
Yes.
They've got to go.
They're always on national TV. Like, they're just, and it's New York. It's the best thing you can goof on is the Yankees. I would probably say Belichick and the Pats would be number 2 for me.
But that's waning.
Because Brady left like 4 years ago.
Yeah, that's almost, you're more apt to mention Buffalo in that division than you'd even think about New York.
Yeah, and the Jets now.
We got to talk about your guy at some point in this 3 hours.
Are you a big Aaron Rodgers fan now?
How
about the turnaround? Now he's Mr. Team Captain. He's sitting at the table with different guys every day for lunch. He can't wait to get there for OTAs.
And they'll throw the backup quarterback in. He'll make a play, and they go, that's got Rodgers written all over it.
Everything is so rosy.
Footwork here.
What happens if he just implodes?
No, he's not going to, though.
Why?
Because he's that good.
Is he?
He is that good. He is.
He did not have a good year last year, Poulin. Like, based on his standards.
How was his year 2 years ago?
MVP.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. And the year before that, MVP.
There you go. He's that good.
He's that good. Oh, I'm not. Listen, he's a top 10 quarterback all time.
But when you see him in a Jets uniform, it just looks funny.
It doesn't feel like it can work. And that's more about the Jets or the
him. Are you with him?
No. I'm not.
Sticking with your squad.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a Packer fan through and through.
But sometimes
I'm not rooting against them.
Sometimes there's a trail down to a favorite guy,
right?
Who's brought you a lot of joy when he's a Packer.
Yeah, I feel like it's different than like when Brady left New England. I got the impression that every Pats fan, they were rooting for him in Tampa,
including that was his new team.
Yeah, exactly. All of a sudden became a lifelong Buccaneer fan. I don't get the impression Packer fans are rooting for Rodgers, but I don't think they're rooting against them. Like, I'm not rooting against him.
They're indifferent to the New York.
It's very indifferent. I think it's an accepted divorce. And I think what most Packer fans are rooting for is that he gets 65% of the snaps. If he does that, the conditional pick goes from a second rounder to a first rounder. That's all people like. Go do what you're going to do. If he has a great season, it'll be incredibly captivating.
I think he's going to be good.
I think he'll be good to very good. I'm not convinced he's going to be like MVP great.
Well, that could just be age related.
Exactly.
Too.
And he's not. He's in completely uncharted territory. I understand Brady just did it, but Brady's a freak. Brady's a different freak.
Brady also brought the pieces in around him.
Yes, he did.
Like he had a lot of control over what he was doing around him. We don't know that Rodgers has that yet.
Well, I mean, he brought in Lazard. I believe Randall Cobb is there, but those are not like elite. That's not Rob Gronkowski.
Comfort zone, though.
It's a comfort zone in the room. Mm-hmm. I think more than anything, having people you know around you probably makes it a comfort zone, but
it does look odd.
It looks odd. It feels odd. We'll see what he's got.
He's that good.
He's that good. He's a top 10 quarterback all time. He's a great player.
A couple things on that. I was in Lambeau Stadium in the quarterback room on an off day, looking at the boards, the whiteboards around that room. And this is every NFL team, I know that. But the volume of intelligence needed to play that position is staggering.
It's outrageous.
It's staggering.
Well, and what they have to do on the fly, what they have to do between weeks is crazy. I saw a clip of him this morning, Rodgers, where he was just saying, we're preparing to get down on the 53-man roster, which will happen, I believe, by tomorrow at noon, I think it is. And he said, once we hit 53 and we know exactly who's in the room, then we're going to implement even more. So it's like they're moving in the direction towards the season, but then once they get to the 53-man roster, then they're really going to hype it up, which only allows them about a week and a half to do it.
Yeah, well, so this was a Monday when we were there. It was an off day. And they'd already written the plays for the upcoming week on the board. Their introductory, kind of the introductory day. And I'm like, and this is totally different. They go, well, we have our staples, but this is for the upcoming defense that we're playing. It was dizzying. It was totally dizzying.
Yeah.
But I also had an opportunity. I'll fill you in on the second part later because it's a pretty funny story.
I want to hear that
it's
because
funny quarterback story.
You're right about the difference between that position and every other position offensively. Like the wideouts, like I know where I'm going on this.
Go down and run down there.
Exactly.
Hero,
or I'm blocking here or I'm a decoy. The quarterback's got to know what every single person's doing, including what the linemen are doing and how they're blocking and their tactics. It's amazing. Hour 2 coming up. Brad Lidge will join us on the struggling Jays. What does he make of Chapman and Bichette out of the lineup tonight? Can they get back into this race? That more still to come. Hour 2. Dave Poulin in here on Brian Hayes. OverDrive continues. TSN 1050 and on TSN 2.